Welcome to this explainer. We're jumping right into what is, honestly, the absolute original blueprint for Hollywood cinematic storytelling. We're talking about a true masterpiece of emotional storytelling and epic composition. It's the one that has literally shaped narratives for 3,000 years. Yep, the Odyssey of Homer.
Okay, let's dive into this. Tell me, Muse, of the man of many ways who has driven far journeys after he had sacked Troy's sacred citadel. Right out of the gate, Homer sets this incredibly inspirational, just massive IMAX-scale epic tone. We are immediately thrust into a world of survival, divine forces, and a hero being pushed to his absolute limits.
To really grasp how this staggering 12,000-line poem works, we're going to deconstruct its architecture, kind of like a director's cut. We'll break it down into these manageable acts, starting with the original epic masterpiece, then the Telemachy, the Great Wanderings, mapping a mythical world, a quick look at the Iliad versus the Odyssey, and finally, reunion and vengeance. So, Section 1. The original epic masterpiece. Let's lay the foundation for our analysis of this timeless epic.
For this explainer, we're anchoring our structural analysis in Richmond Lattimore's absolutely masterful translation. His introduction brilliantly maps out the architecture of the poem, showing us not just what happens, but exactly how Homer constructed the narrative for maximum emotional impact. At the center of the whole shebang is our protagonist, Odysseus, and we really have to appreciate the sheer scale of his journey here. He spent 10 grueling years fighting at Troy, right? And then he endures a disastrous 10-year odyssey just trying to get back home. 10 whole years. He loses all his ships, all his men, all the spoils of war. It is, for sure, the ultimate test of human endurance.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Telemachy, delaying Odysseus. Now, you might think an epic about Odysseus would actually start with, well, Odysseus, but Homer makes a brilliant structural choice here, creating what we'd call today a cold open.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the epic completely subverts chronological order. Homer skips the linear timeline altogether. Instead, the narrative kicks off in year 20 with Telemachus, Odysseus' son. By showing us the chaos back home, a palace totally overrun by arrogant suitors, a family on the brink, Homer builds up Odysseus' magnitude. We see his family's desperate need for him before we even catch a glimpse of the man himself.
Moving on to Section 3, the Great Wanderings. Once we finally do meet our hero, the story eventually transitions into an extended flashback sequence. This is where Odysseus actually takes over as a first-person storyteller, recounting the most famous parts of the epic.
We can categorize the absolutely harrowing challenges Odysseus faces into two distinct types of tests. On one side, we have trials by terror. Think sheer, visceral, physical survival against monstrous forces like the Cyclops or the man-eating Lystrigons. On the other side, trials by temptation. These are psychological tests of restraint against the Lotus Eaters, Circe, and the Sirens. It beautifully represents the ultimate human struggle between our primal fears and our deepest desires. It's basically a masterclass in showcasing a hero's self-control.
But listen, Odysseus isn't just physically strong. The guy is cunning. As this quote notes, he knew how to say many false things that were like true sayings. This really highlights the deeply imaginative and, potentially deceptive nature of his survival tactics. He survives not just by the sword, but by his wits. He has this uncanny ability to spin a hyper-realistic, totally convincing narrative right on the spot.
This leads us perfectly into Section 4, mapping a mythical world. Here, we're going to explore the fascinating world-building of the poem, as Homer creates a setting that blends authentic, real-world sailor reports with just pure, unadulterated fantasy.
So, let's ask a sort of literary detective question that has plagued scholars for literally centuries. Where in the world is Ithaca? The home of our heroes seems like it should be an easy place to pinpoint on a map, right?
Well, not exactly. The text presents this fascinating paradox: topographical accuracy combined with geographical incoherence. See, Homer describes Ithaca as lying low and away, last of all on the water toward the dark. But the surprising fact? Those specific details actually fit the island of Corfu way better than the real-world island of Ithaca.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the epic uses language to create this incredibly visual, hyper-detailed wonder world. When Homer says it looked like a shield lying on the misty face of the water, His poetic lens gives us an almost photorealistic view of a landscape that exists purely in the imagination.
Section 5. The Iliad versus the Odyssey. Let's compare the two to really appreciate the unique flavor of this epic.
While they definitely share DNA, they are fundamentally different experiences. The Iliad is grounded in this embattled, tragic realism, large armies clashing under the watchful eyes of the major Olympian gods. The Odyssey, however, is a much more intimate survival story. It focuses on small groups, minor divinities, sea monsters, and a rich, almost fairy tale imagination. It's way less about national glory and much more about personal endurance.
Which brings us to our final act, Section 6, Reunion and Vengeance. The grand finale. After years of wandering and years of agonizing waiting, the timelines finally converge back on the island of Ithaca for the ultimate showdown.
The cinematic tension here is just palpable. Odysseus arrives disguised as an old beggar. He plays this incredibly tense waiting game with his circumspect wife Penelope, who, by the way, is desperately trying to hold off 108 arrogant suitors. Outnumbered immensely, literally 108-4, Odysseus, his son, and 2 loyal servants prepare to spring a deadly trap. So, the crucial point is exactly how this climax erupts. It all centers on the test of the bow, Odysseus' own massive weapon that none of the suitors can even string. When the beggar steps up, takes the bow, strings it effortlessly, and fires, the disguise drops. What follows is a horribly bloody, entirely merciless vengeance locked inside the doors of the Great Hall.
And then, honestly, things get a little funny. After all this massive, epic buildup and chaotic slaughter, the relatives of the dead suitors naturally want revenge. The narrative is teetering on the edge of a massive civil war. So what happens? The gods essentially scramble like stressed-out screenwriters trying to patch together a peaceful ending. A super hasty deus ex machina occurs where the goddess Athena literally flies down and imposes an abrupt peace pact just to wrap the whole thing up.
Which leaves us with this final thought. When stripped of our armor, our titles, and our companions, in the ultimate tests of survival, is it physical strength or the sheer force of our will that brings us home? It's a profound question, and it's exactly why this 3,000-year-old masterpiece of emotional storytelling still matters and still totally captivates us today.